The first time my father called me a fraud. He did it in a packed federal courtroom in Fairfax, Virginia. His voice cracked like a whip through the heavy silence. Loud enough that the court reporter's fingers froze above her stenotype machine. "That man is not my son," Thomas Harlan bellowed, pointing directly at me with a trembling finger. "He's an imposter. A liar who's been wearing a uniform he never earned. Everything about him is fake." The words landed like artillery fire. A collective inhale swept through the gallery. I stood motionless behind the defendant's table in my Army service uniform. The dark green fabric pressed sharp, the JAG insignia gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply met his gaze. The courtroom smelled of old wood polish, burnt courthouse coffee, and the faint dampness of winter coats still clinging to people's shoulders. Outside the tall windows, gray Virginia sky pressed down, threatening sleet. Inside, every eye in the room swung toward me like spotlights on a stage I had never asked to stand on. My father, Colonel Thomas Harlan, retired, stood in the front row of the gallery, his face flushed with righteous fury. At 71, he still carried the rigid posture of a man who had spent 23 years commanding military police. His dark suit looked expensive, but sat awkwardly on his now frail frame, as if even his clothes were beginning to betray him. Beside him sat my older brother Jacob, smirking with the same entitled confidence he'd worn since childhood. "You think you can just walk in here wearing those medals and take everything your mother left behind," my father continued, his voice rising. "You abandoned this family the day you chose West Point over real duty. You're no son of mine. You never were." A low murmur rippled through the spectators. Some were old neighbors from Cedar Hollow. Others were retired officers who had once saluted my father. A few local reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, the scratch of pens audible in the tents. Quiet between his outbursts, I remained perfectly still, hands clasped behind my back. The weight of my service uniform, familiar and grounding. The silver oak leaf of a major rested on my shoulders. The JAG Corps badge felt cool against my chest. I could feel the faint pull of the long scar running beneath my shirt collar, a souvenir from Kandahar that no one in this room could see. My attorney, Sarah Kensington, placed a steady hand on my forearm. "Don't respond," she whispered under her breath. I didn't need the reminder. I had already decided silence was my only weapon today. Judge Harold Whitmore, an older man with a face like weathered granite, banged his gavel once. The sound echoed sharply off the oak-paneled walls. "Mr. Harlan, you will address the court through your counsel or remain silent," the judge warned, though his tone carried more curiosity than rebuke. "This is a probate and paternity dispute hearing, not a platform for personal attacks." My father's lawyer, Richard Vance, a slick man in a charcoal suit, stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional. His late wife's estate is being contested by someone he claims has misrepresented his entire identity, including his military record." Vance held up a thick folder. "Significant portions of Major Ryan Harlan's alleged service history cannot be independently verified. We intend to prove this man has built a career and now seeks financial gain on exaggeration and outright fabrication." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I felt the shift in the room, the subtle way people leaned forward. The way old family friends who once congratulated me on my promotions now studied me with narrowed eyes. Humiliation, I realized, had a physical weight. It pressed against my ribs and made the air feel thicker. Yet I kept my breathing even. Years of courtroom experience as a JAG officer had taught me that silence was often louder than any defense. Let them talk. Let them expose themselves. My father wasn't finished. He stepped forward despite the bailiff's warning gesture, his voice cracking with years of resentment. "You were never strong enough, Ryan. Always hiding behind books and laws while real men did the fighting. And now you come back here trying to steal your mother's house. The house I paid for with my blood and sweat. You're a disgrace to the uniform. The smell of polished wood grew sharper as the heating system kicked on. A droplet of condensation slid down my untouched glass of water on the table. I noticed every small detail the way Jacob avoided my eyes. The nervous fidgeting of my father's hands that he tried to hide by clenching them into fists. I remembered the last time we had spoken before today. 3 weeks after my mother's funeral, he had stood at the cemetery gate, cold wind whipping through the dead grass, and said almost the same words. "You stopped being my son the day you chose that uniform over this family." Now he was saying it publicly. In front of strangers and old acquaintances, turning private bitterness into courtroom spectacle, Judge Whitmore banged the gavel again. Louder this time. "That's enough. Mr. Harlan, sit down or I will have you removed." My father finally sat, breathing heavily. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in every mind present. Was I really who I claimed to be had the decorated JAG officer been living a lie? I lowered myself into my chair with deliberate calm. The wooden seat creaked softly beneath me. Sarah slid a sealed dark blue envelope across the table toward me thick. Official. Bearing the unmistakable Pentagon insignia. I didn't touch it yet. Not here. Not now. Instead, I looked straight ahead, letting the weight of every accusation settle around me like sand in a desert storm. I had survived worse in places whose names I still couldn't speak aloud. I would survive this too. But as the hearing continued with procedural arguments, I allowed myself one quiet thought. They have no idea what they just started. The courtroom faded as my mind drifted back to Cedar Hollow, the small Virginia town where the mountains hugged the horizon, and everyone knew everyone else's business. I was 8 years old again, standing barefoot on the cracked concrete driveway, while the late afternoon sun baked the asphalt. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and motor oil from my father's old pickup truck. "That's how a real man throws a football," my father shouted, his deep voice booming across the yard. He clapped Jacob hard on the back as my older brother, then 12, launched a perfect spiral that sailed over the oak tree. Jacob grinned, like he'd just won the Super Bowl. Dad ruffled his hair, roughly the kind of affection he reserved only for his firstborn. I stood a few yards away, clutching a worn library book about famous courtroom trials. The pages were soft from being read too many times. When Dad finally glanced in my direction, his smile vanished. "You still reading that nonsense?" "Ryan," he shook his head. "Books won't make you strong. Girls read books. Boys need to get their hands dirty." The word stung, but I had already learned not to show it. I nodded quietly and went back inside the house. The screen door slammed behind me with a familiar metallic snap. In the kitchen, my mother was stirring a pot of beef stew. The rich aroma of onions, carrots, and slow-cooked meat filled the warm space. Eleanor Harlan always smelled faintly of lavender, soap, and home. She saw my face and didn't need to ask. Wiping her hands on her apron, she pulled me into a gentle hug. "Don't listen to him, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing my hair back. "There are different kinds of strength. Your father only understands one of them." That night at dinner, the yellow wallpaper in the dining room seemed to peel a little more than usual under the overhead light. Dad carved the roast with precise, angry strokes of the knife, while recounting his military police stories, how he once chased down a deserter single-handedly. Jacob hung on every word, laughing in all the right places. I sat quietly, pushing peas around my plate. When I mentioned that I had gotten the highest score in my class on a history test about the Constitution, Dad grunted without looking up. "History won't keep you alive in a real fight." My mother tried to intervene. "Tom, he's only 8. He needs to toughen up." Dad cut her off, stabbing another piece of meat. "This world doesn't reward soft boys." I didn't argue. I never did. Instead, I absorbed every criticism like dry sand soaking up rain. By the time I turned 12, the pattern had become carved in stone. Jacob wrecked Dad's truck, at 16 crashing it into a neighbor's mailbox after a party. Dad laughed about it for years, calling it a hell of a story. When I brought home straight A's, the house stayed silent for days. The summer I turned 17. The acceptance letter from West Point arrived in a crisp white envelope. My hands shook as I tore it open on the front porch. The morning air was thick with the scent of blooming honeysuckle and distant rain. My mother cried happy tears the moment she read it, covering her mouth with both hands. "Oh, Ryan, my God." Dad was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. He barely glanced up from his newspaper when I showed him the letter. "You'll wash out in 6 months," he said flatly, cutting into his eggs. "Stubbornness isn't the same as strength. They'll see right through you." The room went deathly quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. My mother stared at him in disbelief. "Tom, no," he interrupted. Calm as ever. "He's always been more like you, too sensitive. The military needs leaders, not lawyers hiding behind regulations." I stood there in that peeling wallpaper kitchen, summer rain beginning to tap against the window pane, and made a silent promise to myself. I would prove him wrong, not by shouting, not by fighting back, but by becoming undeniable. West Point tested every limit I had. The brutal early mornings, the marches until my legs burned, the upperclassmen who wanted me gone simply because I existed. I learned to run until my lungs felt raw, to study until my eyes blurred, and to keep my mouth shut when others expected me to break. While some cadets collapsed under the pressure, I kept climbing because emotional cold was something I had already survived for years at home. Graduation day came 4 years later. My mother drove 9 hours alone to watch me receive my commission as a second lieutenant in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Dad stayed home. He claimed he had better things to do. Later I learned he spent that weekend drinking with old MP buddies at a fishing cabin, telling them his son had chosen the easy path. The years that followed blurred into deployments: Germany, Kuwait, and places whose names never made it into official reports. I missed holidays, funerals, and every chance at a normal life. Meanwhile, Jacob drifted from one failure to another: failed businesses, dues, mounting gambling debts. Each time he fell, Dad was there to catch him. "That's my son," Dad would say proudly. As if those 3 words excused everything, the resentment grew quietly, like rust on metal. Dad hated when neighbors thanked me for my service. He hated the promotions. During one Christmas dinner, when an old family friend congratulated me on making captain, Dad snorted into his whiskey. "Military's gone soft," he muttered. "Half of it's politics now." My mother looked exhausted, the way she always did when trying to hold our fractured family together with trembling hands. Then she got sick. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Machines hummed softly through the nights as snow fell outside the windows. I took extended leave and sat by her bed for weeks, holding her hand while the cancer stole her piece by piece. Dad rarely stayed longer than 20 minutes. One evening, after she had drifted off, he stood in the doorway staring at me. "You always needed attention," he said coldly. "Even now, with her dying, you make it about yourself." I nearly stood up. The rage burned hot in my chest. But my mother stirred and opened her eyes. The fear I saw in them for what we had become stopped me cold. She passed 2 days later. Her hand still in mine. At the funeral, under a cold gray sky that smelled of wet earth and dying flowers. Dad barely looked at me. Afterward, near the cemetery gates where the wind moved through the dead grass, he finally spoke. "You stopped being my son the day you chose that uniform over this family." He walked away without waiting for a reply. 3 weeks later, the court summons arrived. I stood in my kitchen in Arlington as rain hammered the windows, reading the words again and again. Thomas Harlan was suing me for my mother's house. Her savings, everything she had worked for. The final line felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. According to my father, I had never been his son at all. I arrived at West Point in the summer of 2006 with 2 duffel bags, and the echo of my father's words still ringing in my ears. The Hudson River shimmered under the morning sun as new cadets marched across the parade grounds in perfect formation. The air carried the sharp scent of freshly mowed grass mixed with gun oil and polished leather. From the first day, the academy stripped away whatever softness remained in me and replaced it with something harder. Quieter. They called us plebes and made sure we understood our place at the bottom. While others broke under the constant yelling and sleep deprivation, I endured. I had already spent years learning how to disappear inside my own silence. When upperclassmen screamed in my face at 0300 hours, demanding to know why my shoes weren't shiny enough, I simply answered with crisp precision and kept moving. The physical exhaustion was almost a relief compared to the cold indifference I had known at home. The smell of sweat-soaked wool and rifle-cleaning solvent became my constant companions. I learned to march until my feet bled inside my boots, to study military law until the pages blurred, and to stand at attention so perfectly that my body felt like it belonged to someone else. Some nights, lying in my narrow bunk, I would run my fingers over the rough wool blanket and wonder if my father would ever acknowledge what I was becoming. He never did. Graduation day in 2010 was crisp and bright. The Corps of Cadets stood in perfect rows while the band played. My mother sat in the stands, tears streaming down her face as I received my commission. She was the only family member who came. My father had sent a short text the night before. Try not to embarrass the name. I read it once, deleted it, and never mentioned it again. My first assignment took me to Germany, then Kuwait, then assignments that never appeared in any public record. As a JAG officer, I didn't just advise commanders on rules of engagement. I investigated. I prosecuted. I sat across from men who had committed war crimes and looked them in the eye while building cases that would send them to Leavenworth. The work demanded absolute precision and even deeper silence. In 2018, I was sent to Kandahar on a classified operation. The air there was thick with dust and diesel fumes. The heat pressed down like a living thing, making every breath feel heavy. Sand got into everything: your boots, your weapon, the collar of your uniform. One night, during a routine convoy escort, an IED tore through the lead vehicle. The explosion left a ringing in my ears that lasted for weeks. Shrapnel sliced across my neck and shoulder. I still carry the scar, a raised line of tissue that tightens whenever the weather turns cold. I didn't write home about it. There was no point. While I was stitching wounds and building cases in forward operating bases, Jacob was back in Virginia wrecking another business. My father bailed him out again. Just like always, every time I received a rare letter from my mother, she would carefully avoid mentioning the latest family drama. But I could read the exhaustion between her lines. The years stacked up. Promotions came. Commendations were issued, some openly, most under sealed cover. I became known in certain circles as the JAG who never raised his voice but whose cases were ironclad. Commanders respected me. Soldiers trusted me. Yet every time I came home on leave, my father treated me like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. During my last visit before my mother's diagnosis, we sat in the living room of the old house. The scent of her fresh coffee and the faint mustiness of old books filled the air. Dad was watching a football game, nursing a glass of whiskey. Still pushing papers, he asked without looking at me. I prosecute war criminals, I replied quietly. He snorted. Real men fight the wars. Lawyers just clean up after them. My mother placed her hand on my knee under the table. I said nothing. I had long stopped trying to explain that the rules I defended were what separated us from the monsters we fought. Silence had become my discipline, my armor, and sometimes my only comfort. When my mother's cancer returned aggressively, I requested emergency leave. For 6 weeks, I slept in a stiff hospital chair beside her bed. The room always smelled of antiseptic and the artificial sweetness of nutritional shakes she could barely keep down. Machines beeped steadily through the nights while snow tapped against the dark windows. I held her hand as she grew weaker, memorizing the fragile weight of her fingers. My father visited less and less. When he did appear, he stood in the doorway like a stranger, offering clipped condolences that felt more like accusations. Even in her final hours, my mother worried about us. "Don't let this break you two apart," she whispered to me one night, her voice barely audible over the hum of the oxygen machine. I kissed her forehead and said nothing. Some promises are too heavy to make. She died on a Tuesday morning, while rain fell softly outside. I was the only one in the room. 3 weeks after the funeral, as I stood in my Arlington apartment with cold rain streaking down the windows, the certified letter arrived. The envelope felt heavier than any classified file I had ever carried. I read the words twice, then a third time, letting them sink in. Tomas Harlange. Ryan Harlan claimed disputed paternity and estate distribution. My own father wasn't just trying to take my mother's house. He was trying to erase me completely. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, poured a cup of coffee that went cold untouched, and stood there listening to the storm outside. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was coming. Then I picked up the phone and called Sarah Kensington. It was time to stop surviving my father. It was time to end this. The law office of Sarah Kensington sat above an old hardware store on a quiet side street in Fairfax. I climbed the narrow wooden staircase the next morning, the steps creaking under my polished dress shoes. The air inside smelled of aged paper, peppermint tea, and a faint trace of lemon furniture polish. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, casting long stripes across shelves lined with thick legal volumes. Sarah was already waiting. 68 years old, silver hair pinned neatly in a tight bun. She moved with the crisp efficiency of someone who had spent decades in uniform before trading it for a courtroom. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, studied me over the rim of her reading glasses as I entered. "Major Harlan," she said, extending a firm handshake. "Sit down. Coffee's fresh. Though I suspect you've barely slept." I took the chair across from her desk. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my uniform. "I've had better nights." She didn't waste time on sympathy. That was one of the reasons I had chosen her. An old colonel had recommended her as the kind of lawyer who doesn't flinch when the devil walks in wearing dress greens. Sarah opened the thick folder containing my father's complaint. "This isn't just about the house or the money. Your father is trying to legally erase you. Disputed paternity is a nuclear option. He's claiming your mother had an affair and that you're the result. He wants the court to declare you have no biological or legal claim to the estate." I stared at the document she slid across the desk. The words blurred for a moment. Outside the window, a truck rumbled past, its engine growling low. "He's been rewriting history for years," I said quietly. "This is just the public version." Sarah leaned back, tapping a pen against her notepad. "I need to know everything you're willing to tell me, especially anything protected. Your service record has gaps, large ones. That's what his lawyer is going to attack. They'll paint you as a paper pusher who exaggerated his record for financial gain." I remained silent for a long moment, listening to the soft ticking of the antique clock on her wall. Then I reached into my briefcase and placed a small, worn photograph on the desk. It showed me standing beside my mother on graduation day at West Point, her smile bright against my dress uniform. She paid for most of that house herself. I said, with her teaching salary and inheritance from her parents, my father contributed very little after his retirement. The gambling debts and failed businesses were Jacob's, not hers. Sarah nodded, making notes. "We have financial records to prove that, but the paternity claim is more dangerous. It's personal. It's designed to humiliate you publicly." She paused, studying me carefully. "You're a JAG officer. You understand classified material better than most. Is there anything in your record that could be unsealed if this goes federal?" I thought of the black document case locked away in the secure storage facility outside Alexandria. The dark blue wax seal, the red stamp that read, "Authorized disclosure only by order of the Secretary of Defense." "There is one package," I said finally. I was instructed never to open it unless my service or identity was directly challenged in a way that threatened national security interests. I never thought my own father would be the one to trigger it. Sarah's expression didn't change. But something shifted in her eyes. Respect. Perhaps. Or recognition. "Bring it," she said simply. "We'll file the necessary motions to submit it under seal. If it's as significant as I suspect, this case will end faster than your father expects." I left her office an hour later with a clear plan and a heavier weight on my shoulders. The afternoon sky had turned steel gray. Cold wind whipped down the street, carrying the scent of coming rain and wet pavement. I drove straight to the secure storage facility, my hands steady on the wheel. The facility was sterile and silent. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I entered my unit. My old footlocker sat against the back wall, scarred from years of deployments. I unlocked it slowly. Inside lay folded uniforms, commendation folders, and beneath them all the black document case. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface. The Pentagon insignia felt raised and official under my thumb. For a brief second, I remembered the night it was given to me in a dimly lit briefing room in Bagram. A senior JAG colonel had slid it across the table with a grave warning. "Some papers protect missions. Others protect men. Only open this if everything else fails." I closed the locker, case in hand, and drove back through the gathering storm. That night, in my Arlington apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with the sealed envelope in front of me. Rain lashed against the windows in silver sheets. The apartment smelled of cooling coffee and the faint metallic tang of my dress uniform hanging nearby. I didn't open the envelope. I simply stared at it, letting the reality settle. My father had spent decades diminishing me. First as a boy who preferred books to football, then as a soldier who chose law over real fighting. Now, as a man, he wanted to erase entirely. He had no idea what kind of man I had actually become in the shadows. He never saw. I placed the sealed case carefully into my briefcase and closed it with a soft click. Tomorrow, the real hearing would begin, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to simply endure my father's scorn. I was going to let the truth do what silence never could. The federal courthouse smelled exactly as I remembered from the preliminary hearing, old oak floors heavily polished, burnt coffee from the clerk's station, and the faint chill of winter air that clung to every coat in the building. On the morning of the main evidentiary hearing, the gallery was fuller than before. Word had spread through Cedar Hollow and the surrounding military communities. Old neighbors, retired officers, and a handful of local reporters filled the wooden benches. The air felt thick with anticipation and judgment. I entered the courtroom in my Class A uniform, the fabric heavy with the quiet authority of 20 years of service. The silver oak leaves on my shoulders caught the light as I walked down the aisle. Sarah Kensington walked beside me, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She carried herself like a woman who had won harder battles than this one. My father was already seated in the front row. Colonel Thomas Harlan looked smaller under the harsh courtroom lights. Yet his eyes burned with the same unyielding certainty that had defined my childhood. Jacob sat next to him, dressed in a cheap suit that pulled tight across his shoulders. Both of them watched me with open contempt as I took my place at the defense table. Judge Harold Whitmore entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The gavel struck once, a sharp crack that silenced the low murmurs. Richard Vance rose immediately, wasting no time. "Your Honor, today we will demonstrate that the defendant, Ryan Harlan, has systematically misrepresented his background, his relationship to the deceased Eleanor Harlan, and most importantly, his military service. We intend to show that his entire identity has been built on deception for personal financial gain." My father nodded vigorously from the gallery. "His yaw set," Vance continued. his voice smooth and practiced. The plaintiff, Colonel Thomas Harlan, has served this nation with honor for over 2 decades. He raised his family under strict values of integrity and duty. It is with deep regret that he must now expose his own son as an impostor who abandoned the family the moment it suited him. I sat motionless, hands resting on the table, fingers lightly interlaced. The weight of the black document case in my briefcase pressed against my leg like a living thing. Vance called my father to the stand first. Thomas Harlan swore the oath with the confidence of a man who had given orders his entire life. Once seated, he leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on me. "That man," he said, pointing directly at me, "is not my son. Not in blood, and certainly not in spirit. He ran off to West Point because he couldn't handle real military life. While I was out enforcing the law as a military police officer, he was hiding behind regulations and paperwork. He broke his mother's heart by choosing his career over family. And now he wants to steal the house she worked her entire life to pay for." His voice grew louder, echoing off the high ceiling. "He's a fraud. Everything about him is fake. Those medals probably bought or borrowed. His rank, who knows how he really got it. He's always been weak. Always been a disappointment." The gallery murmured. I could feel the eyes on me, some pitying, some skeptical, some outright hostile. The scent of wood polish seemed stronger now, almost suffocating. My father's words washed over me like cold rain. I had heard versions of them my entire life. Today they were simply louder. Sarah remained perfectly still beside me, taking careful notes. When it was time for cross-examination, Sarah stood. Her voice was calm but carried steel. "Colonel Harlan, did you attend your son's commissioning ceremony at West Point?" My father shifted. "I had other obligations." "Did you attend any of his promotion ceremonies? Those things are political." He muttered. Sarah pressed gently. "You claim Major Harlan's service record is fabricated. Yet you've never actually seen his full record. Have you? He's never shown it to me." My father shot back. "Because he knows it won't hold up." I noticed the slight tremor in his left hand as he gripped the edge of the witness stand. The same tremor I had seen years ago, when he tried to hide how much my mother's illness had shaken him. Vance called several character witnesses old friends from Cedar Hollow, who testified that I had changed after joining the military. That I had become distant, cold. Each one painted the picture my father wanted. The ungrateful son who abandoned his family for glory that didn't exist. Through it all, I sat in silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because every accusation revealed more about the man making them than about me. The subtle clues were there for anyone trained to see them, the way I instinctively tracked every person in the room. The faint tan line on my wrist, where a watch had once sat during desert operations. The perfectly disciplined posture that no civilian could fake for this long. When the morning recess was called, my father walked past our table on his way out. He stopped for a moment, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Give it up. Ryan. Walk away. You don't belong here." I looked at him directly for the first time that day. My voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You still don't understand." "Do you?" He sneered and kept walking. After the recess, Sarah stood before the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit evidence regarding Major Harlan's protected service record." Richard Vance laughed under his breath. "Protected convenient." Sarah ignored him and turned to me. I reached into my briefcase and removed the thick black document case. The dark blue Pentagon seal gleamed under the lights as I placed it on the evidence table. The red classification markings were impossible to miss. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, his expression shifting from mild interest to sharp focus the moment he saw the official seals. "Approach the bench," he said. Sarah carried the envelope forward. My father's face had gone pale. Jacob looked confused. Sensing for the first time that something was deeply wrong, I remained seated, breathing steady. the scar beneath my collar suddenly feeling warm against my skin. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah Kensington lifted the black document case from the evidence table with both hands, as though it weighed far more than its physical size suggested. The courtroom had grown so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of fabric as people leaned forward in their seats. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. "The defense respectfully submits this sealed federal documentation concerning Major Ryan Harlan's protected service record. It is submitted under formal classification protocols and requests. Restricted review by the court at this time." Richard Vance shot up from his chair. "Objection. Your Honor, this is an obvious delaying tactic. If the defendant had legitimate records, they would have produced them weeks ago instead of this theatrical nonsense." Judge Harold Whitmore raised a hand, silencing the objection before it could gain momentum. His eyes locked onto the dark blue wax seal and the embossed Pentagon insignia for several long seconds. The only sound was the soft crinkle of paper as he turned the case over in his hands. "I'll review it in chambers first," the judge said. "Court will recess for 15 minutes. The bailiff announced the recess. But no one in the gallery moved. The tension stretched like a wire pulled tight. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face flushed. Jacob whispered something urgent to him. But Thomas Harlan waved him off angrily. I remained seated, hands folded, breathing measured. The scar along my neck itched faintly beneath my collar, a phantom reminder of sand and fire. When court reconvened, Judge Whitmore returned with a markedly different expression. The granite-like composure had cracked. He carried the documents carefully, as if they might burn his fingers. He did not sit down immediately. Instead, he stood behind the bench, looking out over the silent room. "Everyone in this courtroom will rise," he ordered. Chairs scraped back. The entire gallery stood in confusion. My father rose slowly, his face now drained of color. Judge Whitmore removed his glasses and set them on the bench with deliberate care. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of absolute authority. "Major Ryan Harlan, please remain standing." I rose to my feet, spine straight, shoulders squared. The judge looked directly at me for the first time with something resembling recognition. "The documents I have just reviewed are authenticated under the highest levels of Department of Defense classification. They confirm that Major Harlan's service record is not only legitimate but contains elements protected under national security directives. Portions of his operational history cannot be publicly disclosed." Even in this court, a wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Cameras clicked discreetly from the back row despite the rules. Judge Whitmore continued, his tone growing heavier. "What these records further establish is that in October 2018, during a classified hostage recovery operation in Afghanistan, Major Ryan Harlan led a small team that successfully extracted a civilian advisor who had been taken captive by insurgent forces." He paused, letting the words settle. "That civilian advisor was me." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went deathly pale. Jacob's mouth fell open. Even Richard Vance looked like he had been struck. Judge Whitmore's voice softened but lost none of its power. "I was working as a senior Department of State liaison attached to a sensitive diplomatic mission. When my convoy was ambushed, I was taken hostage. The official rescue operation was delayed due to command complications. Major Harlan made the decision to move in with his team anyway. He personally carried me out under fire after I had been wounded. I owe him my life." He looked straight at my father. "Colonel Harlan, you have spent the better part of this hearing accusing a decorated JAG officer of fraud, an officer whose classified commendations include the Silver Star and multiple operational distinctions. This court is not even cleared to fully examine." My father gripped the back of the bench in front of him, knuckles white. This is impossible," he stammered. "He's just a lawyer. He never." "Enough." Judge Whitmore cut him off sharply. "You have wasted the time of this court. and publicly slandered a serving officer whose service has been verified at the highest levels. The paternity claim, the estate dispute, the accusations of fabrication, all of it now sits under the shadow of potential federal perjury. Two men in dark suits entered quietly through the side door. No badges were visible, but their posture and watchful eyes marked them as federal. One approached the bench and handed the judge an additional folder. Judge Whitmore glanced at the new documents, then addressed the room. Due to the classified nature of the records improperly challenged in these proceedings, this matter has now drawn the attention of the Department of Justice. Further review regarding false statements and attempts to access protected military files will proceed separately. My father staggered backward half a step. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, not anger, not arrogance, but raw, naked fear. I stood perfectly still, the weight of my uniform grounding me. Inside, memories flashed: the acrid smell of burning fuel in Kandahar, the taste of dust in my mouth, the sound of gunfire echoing between mud walls, all the years of silence, all the nights I chose duty over family. Judge Whitmore turned to me once more. Major Harlan, this court formally acknowledges your honorable service and apologizes for the indignity you have endured here today. I gave a single, crisp nod, the only response necessary. As the judge prepared to issue his ruling, my father suddenly pointed a shaking finger at me. You turned everyone against me," he shouted, voice cracking. Just like your mother always did, the words fell flat in the heavy air. I finally spoke, my voice low, but carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "No, Dad, you did that yourself." The gavel came down. The gavel struck with finality, a sharp crack that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Judge Harold Whitmore looked out over the stunned courtroom, his expression grave. "This court dismisses all claims brought by the plaintiff, Thomas Harlan. In their entirety, the estate of Eleanor Harlan shall pass to her son, Major Ryan Harlan, as stipulated in her will. Furthermore, the plaintiff's allegations of disputed paternity are hereby rejected as baseless and knowingly false." A collective exhale rippled through the gallery. Several people whispered urgently. Reporters in the back row began typing furiously on their laptops. The judge continued, his voice carrying unmistakable steel. "Mr. Harlan, you are strongly advised to seek counsel regarding potential federal consequences for filing false statements in this court and for attempting to challenge protected military records. This matter is now being referred to the appropriate authorities." My father stood frozen, his face ashen, mouth slightly open as if the words had physically struck him. Jacob grabbed his arm, but Thomas Harlan shook it off violently. His eyes found mine across the courtroom, no longer filled with rage, but with something far more devastating, the shattering realization that he had lost completely. Richard Vance stood quickly, his polished demeanor cracking. "Your Honor, we request denied." Judge Whitmore interrupted. "This hearing is adjourned." The bailiff called, "All rise," and the courtroom slowly came to its feet. As Judge Whitmore exited, he paused briefly and gave me a respectful nod. I returned it with a crisp salute, the only gesture that felt appropriate. The two federal agents remained near the side door. Watching quietly, I gathered the few documents on my table with deliberate calm. Sarah Kensington placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. "Better than well." "Thank you," I replied, my voice even. "For everything," she smiled faintly. "Go home, Major. The house is yours now. Make it yours." As the gallery began to empty, my father pushed through the small crowd toward me. Security moved closer, but I raised a hand slightly, stopping them. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, looking suddenly old and diminished in his ill-fitting suit. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The scent of wood polish and cooling coffee lingered heavily in the emptying room. Outside, sleet had begun tapping against the tall windows. "You think this makes you better than me?" he finally rasped. His voice rough and broken. "Parading your secrets in front of everyone." I looked at him steadily. The man who had towered over my childhood now seemed small. Fragile. The scar on my neck tightened slightly as I remembered every time he had cut me down with a single sentence. "No," I said quietly. "It doesn't make me better. It just means I stopped needing you to believe in me a long time ago." His eyes glistened with something anger. Shame. Or perhaps just exhaustion. "Your mother? She always favored you. She loved you." I replied simply. "Until the end. Even when you made it impossible." Jacob hovered behind him, looking lost. My father opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. For the first time in my life, Colonel Thomas Harlan had nothing left to say. I picked up my briefcase, the black document case safely inside once more. "I'm not going to destroy you," I said, my tone calm and final. "I don't need to. You did that yourself the moment you decided to erase me." With that, I turned and walked out of the courtroom. My footsteps echoed steadily down the marble hallway. I didn't look back. Outside, the cold Virginia air hit me hard, carrying the sharp scent of wet pavement and winter rain. Federal agents waited discreetly near my car. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, gave me a respectful nod. "Major," he said, "we'll handle the rest from here." I drove back toward Cedar Hollow in silence. The windshield wipers moved rhythmically across the glass, as sleet turned to light snow. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my mother's house, now my house, the afternoon light had begun to fade. I sat in the car for several minutes, engine off, listening to the soft ticking as it cooled. Then I stepped out and walked up the familiar porch steps. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old books, just as she had left it. Dust motes floated in the golden light streaming through the windows. I walked slowly through every room, touching the back of her favorite reading chair, running my hand along the blue kitchen tiles she had chosen herself. For the first time in years, the silence in the house felt peaceful rather than heavy. Later that evening, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found a small cedar chest. Inside were letters written in my mother's elegant handwriting, sealed and addressed to me. I opened the first one with trembling fingers. The quiet resolution had finally begun. The weeks that followed passed in a quiet rhythm I had almost forgotten existed. Spring arrived slowly in Cedar Hollow, melting the last patches of snow and coaxing pale green buds from the maple trees that lined the long driveway. I moved into my mother's house permanently, not as a returning son, but as someone finally claiming a piece of peace that had been withheld for too long. Each morning I woke to the soft creak of the old wooden floors and the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the curtains. I kept many things exactly as she had left them, her reading glasses on the side table, the knitted blanket draped over the armchair, the blue tiles in the kitchen that caught the morning light just right. But I also made changes. I painted the walls a lighter shade, opened windows that had stayed closed for years, and let fresh air sweep through rooms that once felt heavy with unspoken resentment. One warm afternoon in late May, I sat on the back porch with a stack of documents. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and distant lilacs. Birds called from the trees as I reviewed the final paperwork for the Eleanor Harlan Scholarship Fund. It would support daughters and sons of military families, especially those pursuing careers in military law and JAG. The first recipients had already been selected. Watching their nervous but proud faces at the small award ceremony a week earlier had stirred something deep inside me. Cycles, I realized, could be broken. That evening, as golden light stretched long across the backyard, I climbed the stairs to the attic once more. The cedar chest waited where I had left it. I carried it downstairs to the living room, sat on the couch, and opened the letters my mother had written for me. The paper was smooth, her handwriting graceful and familiar. The first envelope carried the faint trace of her lavender perfume even after all this time. My dearest Ryan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And things with your father have likely become very difficult. I'm so sorry. My son, I tried for years to bridge the gap between you two. But some distances grow wider with time. Your father was not always this hard. Life chipped away at him the things he saw in the military. The disappointments he never spoke about. The fear that he was never quite enough. But you were never the problem. You were the part of our family that made me proud every single day. Never doubt that you were loved. Not just by me, but by a mother who saw your quiet strength long before the world did. You chose service. Not for glory, but because you believed in something larger than yourself. That has always been enough. Take the house. Make it a home again. And when the anger feels too heavy, remember that real power doesn't need to shout. You were always my greatest joy. With all my love. Mom. Tears slipped quietly down my face as I folded the letter. I didn't wipe them away immediately. For once, there was no one to hide them from. The house was silent except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant call of evening birds. A soft knock came at the front door just as the sun began to set. I already knew who it was. My father stood on the porch, hands deep in the pockets of his worn jacket. The confident colonel, who had once filled every room, now looked like a man carrying the full weight of his choices. The evening breeze moved through the trees behind him, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. We stood looking at each other through the screen door for a long moment. Ryan, he said, his voice rough and uncertain. I stepped outside but didn't invite him in. The wooden porch boards creaked beneath my feet. He cleared his throat. I heard about the scholarship. Your mother, she would have been proud. I nodded once, saying nothing. He shifted his weight. I made mistakes. A lot of them. His eyes flicked to the ground. Then back to me. I don't expect you to forgive me. Hell, I'm not even sure I can forgive myself. The wind rustled the new leaves overhead. I studied the man who had shaped so much of my pain. And for the first time, I felt neither anger nor the need to prove anything. You gave me something important, I said quietly. You taught me how to survive without approval. That skill saved my life more than once. He looked up. Surprised, I continued, my voice calm and steady. I don't hate you, Dad, but I don't need you anymore either. This house, this life I'm building, it's mine now. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. Thomas Harlan stood there for several heartbeats, the evening light deepening the lines on his face. Then he gave a small, defeated nod. Without another word, he turned and walked slowly down the porch steps. His shoulders slightly hunched against the cool air. I watched him disappear down the driveway until the shadows swallowed him. Then I went back inside and closed the door gently behind me. No dramatic ending. No final confrontation. Just the quiet sound of a chapter closing. That night, I sat on the porch again, a cup of coffee growing warm in my hands. The stars emerged one by one above the Virginia mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. I had spent years proving I was worthy to my father, to the army, to myself. In the end, the only approval that truly mattered had come from the woman who had believed in me from the very beginning. And that was enough.